If you grew up in Britain after the war, chances are you knew someone with a best room. Maybe your gran had one, or your aunt, or your neighbor down the street. This was the room nobody actually used, the one with the good furniture covered in plastic, the china cabinet full of wedding presents from 1950-something, the carpet that stayed pristine because nobody walked on it. The rest of the house could be chaos. Kids running about, dog hair everywhere, but the best room sat there like a museum exhibit, dusted weekly and entered maybe twice a year. It wasn't just rooms, though. People kept tablecloths folded away for decades, terrified of staining them. Soap stayed wrapped in tissue paper. Silver cutlery lived in felt-lined boxes, turning black in the dark. The logic went something like this. You sacrificed during the war, then you rebuilt, and once you finally had nice things, you protected them, saved them for important occasions. The trouble was, those occasions rarely came, or when they did, you were too anxious about ruining everything to actually enjoy it. The good china was kept separate and only brought out for special occasions. This was not what you used for Tuesday dinner. The good china came out for Christmas, important visitors, or Sunday afternoon tea. Most sets were fine porcelain or bone china, much thinner than everyday crockery. The plates were so delicate you could see light through them. Each set included matching cups and saucers, often with gilded rims or painted patterns. Between uses, the good china lived in a glass-fronted cabinet arranged for display. Some families hung decorative plates on the wall with wire hangers. Popular makes included Wedgwood, Royal Doulton, and Noritake, though many treasured sets with no fancy name. The rules were strict. Hand wash only, dry immediately with a clean tea towel, never stack carelessly. A chipped piece was a genuine crisis. These sets were usually wedding presents or family heirlooms, passed down over decades. Using the good china meant the occasion was important enough to risk your finest dishes. Crystal glasses were the theatrical props of mid-century hospitality. These were kept behind the glass doors of the display cabinet in the front room, only brought out when someone important came round or when a bottle of sherry appeared at Christmas. The weight of the glass itself was part of the message you were sending. When you pressed a heavy cut glass tumbler into someone's hand, you were saying something about yourself and your standards. This wasn't about making the drink taste better, though people convinced themselves it did. It was about performing respectability. The act of fetching the crystal, carefully washing it beforehand, pouring the Babychum or Harvey's Bristol cream into it, and then the ritual of hand-washing it afterwards and putting it away again. All of this was coded behavior. Your neighbors might have the same settee as you, but did they have a set of Waterford? Crystal separated the everyday from the occasion, the mundane cuppa from the proper visit. It was glassware as social armor, sparkle as status. If you opened the right drawer in most mid-century households, you'd find the good cutlery, not the everyday knives and forks with their worn handles and slight discoloration, but the proper set. Polished silver or silver-plated pieces that gleamed when you pulled them out, often stored in lined boxes or wrapped in special anti-tarnish cloth. These stayed put unless company was coming round. Your mum might announce on a Tuesday that relatives were visiting on Saturday, and by Friday evening she'd be at the kitchen table with a tin of Silvo and a soft cloth, methodically polishing each piece until it shone. The everyday cutlery carried on handling the daily meals, whilst the fancy stuff stayed pristine in its drawer, emerging only for birthdays, Sunday roasts with visitors, or the vicar coming for tea. It was this odd split where certain possessions were deemed too good for ordinary life. You bought them, you owned them, but you barely used them. The logic was preservation, but what you were preserving them for was often unclear. The front room was the cleanest space in the house, and the one you were least likely to actually live in. Families who had one kept it shut behind a closed door most of the year, preserving it for occasions that mattered. The best furniture sat covered in protective plastic sheeting, the carpet remained spotless because feet rarely touched it, and the good china stayed locked behind glass in the dresser. Children learned not to touch the door handle without express permission. In working-class homes especially, this room served as proof of respectability, evidence the family had standards even when money was scarce. It opened for 3 specific types of occasion: family celebrations like weddings or confirmations, particularly when relatives came from abroad, formal visits from the parish priest or other important callers, and wakes when the deceased was laid out and neighbours filed through to pay respects. The rest of the time, it sat cold and unused, unheated even in winter, carrying the particular smell of furniture wax and the stillness of a room kept mainly for show. Plastic covers on furniture became a household fixture in the mid-20th century, particularly in homes where the sofa was a significant investment worth protecting. The approach is straightforward. You drape clear vinyl or polyethylene over your furniture, creating a waterproof barrier that stops spills and stains from reaching the upholstery. The protection is absolute. A glass of juice gets knocked over, you wipe it away, and the fabric underneath remains untouched. For families with children or pets, that defense feels practical, but the living experience is uncomfortable. The material feels sticky against bare skin in warm weather and cold when you first sit down. It rustles with every movement, and because it's slippery, you slide around rather than settling comfortably. The cover reflects light differently too, giving even a beautiful sofa a clinical appearance, as if it's on display rather than meant for use. That's the core trade-off. You preserve the original fabric perfectly, but you sacrifice the comfort and warmth that made the piece appealing in the first place. The display cabinet evolved from glazed bookcases during the 18th century and became a standard piece of furniture once collecting decorative objects turned fashionable. It sat in the living room or dining room, a wooden structure with glass panels where visitors couldn't miss it. Inside were felt-lined shelves holding everything families accumulated over decades: commemorative mugs from royal events, porcelain figurines of shepherdesses or cottages marketed as limited editions, decorative plates from holidays, miniature ceramic buildings, crystal glasses too precious for everyday use sat next to actual family treasures like inherited tea sets, children's pottery, or dried funeral flowers. The back was mirrored to enhance the display and reflect light onto the objects. These things rarely got touched once arranged. They sat behind the glass gathering dust year after year, waiting for guests to notice them. What filled your cabinet communicated your taste, where you'd traveled, what interested you, what you could afford. The whole thing functioned as storage in theory, but performance in practice, a visible record of family milestones and status available for immediate assessment by anyone walking through your door. Shrankware means wardrobe goods, the clothes you kept locked away for occasions that mattered. In households across Europe and beyond, families maintained a separate category of garments reserved strictly for church, weddings, funerals, christenings, or visits to important relatives. These outfits stayed folded in wardrobes or chests, wrapped in clean linen, or laid flat with lavender sachets tucked between the folds to keep moths away. The logic was straightforward. Everyday work ruins fabric quickly, so you protected your best pieces by hardly wearing them at all. A woman might own one silk dress or a man one proper suit, worn perhaps a dozen times a year, and carefully brushed and aired after each outing. Children had Sunday clothes that saw church in the morning and were immediately changed out of one's home. This habit wasn't about vanity, it was about making expensive textiles last a decade or more when replacing them wasn't an option. Fabric stored this way needed protection from light, moisture, and dust, so wardrobes were often placed in interior rooms away from windows. The best garments became small archives of family milestones, their careful preservation a form of practical memory. Most households had a set of towels that no one was actually supposed to use. These were the good towels. They sat neatly folded on display in the bathroom or tucked away in a linen closet, reserved exclusively for guests, whilst the family made do with threadbare everyday ones. What made these towels special came down to materials and appearance. Some featured decorative details, embroidered floral patterns, monogrammed initials in elegant script, or jacquard borders that made them look too posh to use for drying yourself after an ordinary Tuesday shower. The logic was straightforward. Guests needed to see you had nice things. The family towels could be faded, rough from years of washing, or worn thin in spots. It didn't matter because you weren't trying to impress yourselves. The good towels stayed pristine, sometimes for years, waiting for company that might visit once or twice a year if that. Guest soap sits on the bathroom counter, pristine and often carved into something decorative, a shell shape maybe, or wrapped in floral paper with a little ribbon attached. You're not meant to actually use it, obviously. The whole setup screams don't touch, even though it's literally soap placed in a room where people wash their hands. The problem is guests are meant to participate without using the props. The actual functional soap, if any exists at all, gets hidden beneath the sink. Guests end up drying their hands on their trousers, having successfully navigated this silent minefield of implied rules about what's decorative versus actually usable. During rationing, most families kept a special tin somewhere in the house, tucked away on a high shelf or in the back of a cupboard. This wasn't for everyday eating. Inside there might be a few quality street chocolates, some bourbons, maybe a small bar of Cadbury's if someone had been lucky enough to find one. The tin stayed shut unless visitors arrived or Christmas came around. Children knew it existed, but also knew better than to go near it without permission. When guests turned up, the tin came down with a bit of ceremony. The lid was lifted, the contents were displayed, and everyone took one piece, maybe two if it was a special occasion. Nobody grabbed a handful. You ate yours slowly, making it last because you had no idea when the tin would be refilled. Some families managed to keep the same tin going for months, adding a sweet here and there when coupons allowed. The restraint wasn't just polite, it was survival. The biscuit tin is one of those household items that sits on a kitchen shelf for years, becoming part of the furniture. It's usually made from tin plate, steel sheets thinly coated with tin to stop rust, and the lid fits snugly to keep contents fresh. Huntley and Palmer's started making decorative ones back in 1831, and by the late Victorian era, they'd become elaborately printed objects with flowers or landscapes stamped on them. The original purpose was keeping biscuits crisp and away from moisture, but what actually ends up inside is often something else entirely. You might open one expecting digestives and find sewing supplies, spare buttons, emergency plasters, or your grandmother's collection of random coins. Some families have what you might call a sacred biscuit tin, usually placed high up where actual good biscuits or emergency sweets live, and there's an unspoken rule about who can help themselves. The kitchen tin versus the special tin is a real hierarchy. Children learn which tin they can raid and which requires permission. Others use them for old receipts or loose screws. The biscuits never turn up in those. The decorative designs mean they stick around for decades. Most families kept what they called the good tablecloth. This one lived folded in a drawer or cupboard, wrapped in tissue paper, or stored in its own special box. It came out maybe 6 times a year if you were lucky. Sunday lunch, when the grandparents visited, Christmas dinner, Easter, maybe a birthday if someone important was coming round. The good cloth was usually white or cream linen, often embroidered, sometimes with lace edges. It cost more than the everyday version, and it showed. You'd iron it carefully before laying it out, making sure the center crease ran perfectly down the middle of the table. Once it was on, the whole meal changed character. Everyone sat up straighter. Children were warned not to spill. The table itself became a stage for performance rather than just a place to eat. This wasn't snobbery exactly, more like marking territory between ordinary days and special ones. The cloth said without words that this meal mattered. When it went back in the drawer afterward, carefully folded again, it took the specialness with it. Sunday best meant wearing your finest clothes for church, formal visits, or important family gatherings. This tradition goes back centuries in Christian communities, built around the idea you showed respect by dressing well. In the Old Testament, priests wore specific garments for temple service, and ordinary people carried this forward. Appearing before God required proper attire. For most folks, Sunday best didn't mean loads of options. It meant owning 2 sets of clothes, everyday workwear and Sunday wear. Your Sunday outfit might be the same dress or suit every week, carefully stored between uses. What mattered wasn't variety, but having something nicer than your daily things. Here's the interesting bit. Sunday best wasn't only about clothing. It also meant activating different behavior entirely. You sat straighter, watched your language, minded your manners more carefully. These standards lay dormant through the week, then switched on when Sunday arrived or a formal occasion demanded it. As fabric became cheaper in the 1800s, dedicated Sunday clothes became more affordable, spreading the custom wider. Some families bought furniture like they were making a pension plan. You saved up for months or years to afford a proper oak sideboard or a 3-piece suite, and once you got it home, the real work started keeping it perfect. These weren't pieces you actually used much. The good dining set stayed under plastic covers except for Christmas and special occasions. The velvet armchairs lived in the front room that nobody entered unless visitors came round. Your mum would have an absolute fit if you put a cup down without a coaster or sat on the good sofa in your school uniform. This mentality made sense when you think about it, because quality furniture genuinely held its value. A decent oak sideboard from the 1960s could still fetch 60 to 70% of what you paid after 10 years if you kept it pristine, while budget stuff depreciated like a knackered car. Victorian sideboards in good condition sell for thousands now. But the irony was brutal in my opinion. You spent half your wages on beautiful furniture, then lived your entire life not touching it, just dusting round the plastic and keeping the good room locked. The whole for best mentality came from somewhere real. If you grew up in the 40s or 50s, or if your mum did, you lived through rationing and the make do and mend years. Clothing coupons meant you chose between a winter coat or new shoes, not both. Darning socks and unraveling old jumpers to re-knit them wasn't quaint, it was ordinary life. Women unpicked adult dresses to make children's clothes, cut up worn-out vests for dusters, saved buttons and zips off everything before it went in the rag bag. Stale bread became pudding. Leftover roast got minced for shepherd's pie, and you joined any queue you saw because it might be something worth having. That generation learned hard lessons about scarcity. Even after rationing ended in 1954, the habits stuck. Waste not, want not stopped being wartime necessity and became moral virtue. Keeping things for best was partly about aspiration, yes, wanting to show you had nice things and standards, but underneath it was also caution, a protective instinct born from years when replacing anything at all was genuinely difficult. You preserved what you had because you remembered when you couldn't get more.